Imagine being forced into an arranged marriage, only to discover that your husband is someone you would never, ever expect. A girl's world is turned upside down when she lifts her wedding veil. Stay tuned to find out who her groom really is, and the shocking secrets hidden behind the marriage. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe if you love suspenseful stories. Zahara sat on the small couch in the living room, flipping through an old photo album. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on the wooden floor. She loved moments like this, quiet, peaceful, with no worries. But that peace did not last long. Her mother, Mama Kessie, walked in with a serious face. Aunt Felicia followed closely behind, smiling in a way that made Zahara feel uneasy. Mama Kessie cleared her throat. Zahara looked up. "Your marriage has been arranged," Mama Kessie said, her voice firm. Zahara's heart skipped a beat. She blinked, hoping she had misheard. Aunt Felicia clapped her hands together, beaming. "He is a fine man, my dear. Rich, powerful, and perfect for you." Zahara's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her heart pounded in her chest. Marriage? To someone she had never met? "I don't understand," she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Mama Kessie sat beside her, patting her knee gently. "It is for the best, my child. He is a good man from a respected family. You will never suffer." "But I don't even know him," Zahara protested, shaking her head. "It does not matter," Mama Kessie said, her tone final. "A woman doesn't always get to choose. Sometimes, destiny chooses for you." Tears burned in Zahara's eyes, but she knew arguing would do no good. Her mother had made up her mind. The next hours passed in a blur. Aunt Felicia made phone calls, confirming the wedding details. Mama Kessie packed Zahara's bags, choosing fine dresses and delicate jewelry. Zahara felt like she was in a bad dream, watching her own life move forward without her control. By the next evening, she was seated on a plane, her mother beside her. The flight was taking them to Houston, Texas, where she would meet her husband-to-be. She still did not know his name. She still did not know his face. Her fingers gripped the armrest tightly as the plane took off. In 48 hours, she would be a married woman. But to who? The car rolled to a stop in front of a massive mansion, its golden gates standing tall and firm. Zahara stared out the window, her heart pounding. She had never seen a house so grand. The driveway was lined with tall palm trees, and a fountain sparkled in the evening light. As she stepped out, two housekeepers rushed forward, opening the car door for her mother and carrying their bags. Zahara clutched her purse tightly. Everything around her smelled of money. Mama Kessie placed a hand on her back, guiding her inside. "This is your new home, my daughter," she said softly. Inside, the house was even more breathtaking. The floors gleamed like glass, and the walls were decorated with paintings bigger than Zahara had ever seen. The chandeliers twinkled above, casting a soft glow on the expensive furniture. Yet, despite the beauty, something felt wrong. She turned to her mother. "Where is he?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Mama Kessie did not answer. She only smiled and gestured for Zahara to follow the maid upstairs. "You will see him at the wedding," Mama Kessie finally said. Zahara's chest tightened. Not even a single conversation? Not even a glance? She swallowed hard, stepping into a massive bedroom where two other women were waiting. They quickly began preparing her, fixing her hair, painting her nails, and fitting her into an expensive white gown. The next morning arrived in a blur. Zahara barely slept. Her body felt light, almost numb, as the women helped her into the extravagant wedding dress. It was covered in fine lace and tiny pearls, shimmering under the light. The veil was long, flowing behind her like a river of silk, but the dress felt heavy, like a chain holding her down. Outside, guests arrived in large black cars, stepping out in designer suits and elegant gowns. Music played softly in the background, and laughter filled the air. It was the wedding of the year. Yet, Zahara felt cold inside. Her hands trembled as she held onto her bouquet. She had never felt this kind of fear before. It was the fear of the unknown. Who was this man? Why hadn't she seen his face? A lump formed in her throat. As she stepped into the grand wedding hall, her heart pounded harder. Something was very, very wrong. The wedding hall was silent. The guests sat in rows of golden chairs, their eyes fixed on the grand aisle where Zahara stood. Her fingers clenched the bouquet of fresh white roses as she took her first step forward. 1 step, 2 steps. Her heart pounded so loudly that she could hear it in her ears. Her legs felt weak, her knees wobbly beneath the heavy dress. The long veil covered her face, blurring her vision slightly, but she could still see the man standing at the altar, her husband-to-be. He stood tall, dressed in a crisp black tuxedo, but his face was hidden beneath a veil. Zahara's stomach twisted into knots. Why was he covering his face? Wasn't she the one supposed to be veiled? She turned slightly, her eyes pleading with her mother, but Mama Kessie sat with her back straight, nodding in approval. Aunt Felicia sat beside her, beaming with pride. Zahara swallowed hard. She had no choice. She kept walking, each step taking her closer to the unknown man she would soon call her husband. The priest cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of this man and woman in holy matrimony." His voice faded into the background. Zahara's hands felt cold as she gripped her bouquet tighter. She tried to focus, tried to control the fear rising in her chest. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times before as a little girl. A wedding filled with joy. A man who would take her hand with love in his eyes. A future filled with laughter and happiness. But this felt like a trap. The priest turned to the groom. "Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" A deep voice answered, "I do." The voice sent chills down Zahara's spine. It sounded familiar. Too familiar. Her breath hitched, but she stayed still. The priest turned to Zahara. "And do you, Zahara Kessie, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Her throat felt dry. She hesitated. She didn't even know his name. Mama Kessie's eyes bore into her, silently warning her not to cause a scene. Zahara took a shaky breath. Her lips parted. I do." The words felt heavy as they left her mouth. A slow clap echoed in the hall. The priest nodded. "You may now lift the veil." The world seemed to slow down. Zahara's hands trembled as she reached forward. Her fingers grasped the edges of the black veil. She took a deep breath and lifted it. The air was sucked out of her lungs. Her legs went numb. Her heart stopped. The man standing before her, the man she was about to marry, was Michael Mensa, her ex-boyfriend. The man who had disappeared from her life 2 years ago after breaking her heart into a million pieces. The man who had betrayed her. The world around her spun. Michael's lips curled into a smirk. He leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "Miss me?" Zahara's vision blurred. Her fingers loosened, and the bouquet fell from her hands, crashing onto the white marble floor. The crowd gasped. Mama Kessie's face remained blank, as if she had expected this all along. Aunt Felicia clapped her hands together. God is good. Look at how fate works. Fate? Zahara felt like she was trapped in a nightmare. Michael looked at her with amusement, as if he enjoyed watching her suffer. Why was he here? Why had he arranged this marriage? A chill ran down her spine. Something was very, very wrong. What does Michael really want? What game is he playing? Zahara's body went cold. Her breath came in short gasps as she stared at Michael, his smirk never leaving his face. She took a step back, but before she could turn, a firm hand grabbed her wrist. Michael. His grip was strong, unyielding. She yanked her arm, but he didn't let go. His fingers tightened around her wrist as he leaned in. His voice was low, barely above a whisper. If you leave now, your entire family loses everything. Zahara's blood ran cold. She turned sharply, her wide eyes darting toward her mother. Mama Kessie did not look angry. She did not look surprised. She simply looked away. Aunt Felicia gave a small, knowing smile, nodding as if nothing was wrong. Zahara's heart slammed against her chest. She turned back to Michael, her hand shaking. What do you mean? She whispered. Michael's smirk widened. I own your family, Zahara. The word struck like a slap to her face. Her breath hitched as flashes of the past rushed through her mind. The Kessie family had been in trouble. Mama Kessie had put all their savings into a business deal with an old friend in Dallas, Texas. A promise of double returns. A way to secure a future for Zahara and her siblings. But the deal had been a lie. The so-called friend vanished. The money, everything, was gone. The house mortgage fell behind. The bills piled up. The loan sharks came knocking. There was no way out. Mama Kessie begged, pleaded, borrowed more money to cover the losses. But it was like pouring water into a bottomless pit. Then Michael appeared. Like a savior. Like a snake. He wiped away the debts. Paid off every single penny. On one condition. When the time comes, he had told Mama Kessie, you will give me what I want. And what he wanted was Zahara. Zahara's stomach twisted in horror. She looked at her mother again. This time, tears welled in Mama Kessie's eyes. Zahara took a shaky step forward. Mama, tell me it's not true. Her mother lowered her head. It's true. The ground beneath Zahara seemed to disappear. Her lips trembled. Her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She had been sold. This wasn't a wedding. This was a transaction. Michael stepped closer, his voice soft, almost mocking. So, my dear wife, will you run? Or will you stay and play your part? Zahara's fingers curled into fists. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. But where would she go? What would happen to her family? What does Michael really want? Will Zahara accept the marriage or find a way to escape? The room was silent. Zahara could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, but she did not waver. She lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and took a step forward. Michael was still smirking, his confidence dripping off him like poison. He thought he had one. He thought she was trapped. But Zahara wasn't a prisoner. She wasn't weak. She looked him straight in the eye, her voice steady and clear. If you think you own me, you're mistaken. This is just the beginning. The hall gasped. The guests whispered amongst themselves. Some clapped, others stared in shock. Aunt Felicia's smile wavered. Mama Kessie gripped the edge of her dress, fear flickering in her eyes. And for the first time that evening, Michael's smirk faded. His jaw tightened. His grip on her wrist loosened slightly. He hadn't expected this. He had prepared for resistance, for tears, maybe even begging. But not this. Zahara stood tall. She refused to crumble. The power in the room had shifted. She wasn't the helpless bride anymore. She wasn't the girl being sold like a piece of property. She was in control. What will happen next? Will Zahara play the game or take control of her fate? What would you do in Zahara's situation? Would you stay and fight or escape? Comment below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more suspenseful stories.